strings. Let's build on that further by this topic of string formatting. So jumping back into my Jupyter Notebook, we're going to be going over 5 different operations for string formatting. And some of them you may have even played with already, the methods of it. And well, the first one, I know you did. Okay, so let's say we have these 2 variables. We're going to be playing with them a lot during these exercises. We have one variable of role, which is the string of data analyst, and then another of skill, which is the string of Python. Now let's say we want to write out to the screen role, and then we're going to be provided a role, in this case, data analyst. We're going to write out to the screen. So for concatenation, we can use the operator of plus, which is that dunder add method. And then from there, specify role. Running this, shift enter, we can see we get role data analyst. No space right here. I'm actually going to put a space, press play. And now we have role :space data analyst. So we did see that one before, but there's actually another one. And I want to actually go into using that help function again on str or string and shift enter that. And that is this format method right here. So for the syntax for this, we're going to start it with the string itself, append on, as we saw before, that dot format method. And then inside parentheses, this is probably new to many of you, of this asterisk args, and then this double asterisk of keywords, which stands for arguments and keyword arguments. We'll go more into breaking this down in the function section, but just understand that these asterisks and these double asterisks are special methods for us to actually apply or put inside of these parentheses many different arguments or many different keyword arguments. Anyway, what does this thing even do? Well, it returns a formatted version of S. Using substitution from args and kwargs, the substitutions are identified by braces. So I'm just going to copy and paste this to make this easier into here, and I'm going to comment it out. To actually comment out everything, you have it selected, and then from there you press Command and /. Windows users are going to press Control /, but it's a quick way to comment out things. Anyway, I just want to have it here so I can actually see it and reference it quicker. So similar to before, we want to create the string role data analyst. Remember, data analyst is in that variable already of a job. Similar to before, we want to create a string, and we're going to start first very simply doing role and then specifying data analyst. So let's start with this string portion right here that we're going to stick in front of the format. I'm going to write out role. Now, additionally, it sees the substitutions are identified by braces. So we're going to put these braces inside of these parentheses. And then from there, I'm going to type in that format method, and I'm going to specify inside of here what I want to put inside of these braces. So pressing Shift Enter, we can see it specifies role data analyst. Now let's take this a step further. Let's say we want to instead now have multiple different variables put inside of this string. And in this case, I want to define not only the role, but also the skills required, in this case, Python. So similar to before, I'm going to have that role and then the braces right there. And then next I'm going to have the skills required and then the braces for that as well. From there, I'll add that format method and I'll specify in here role and skill. Going back to that documentation, these arguments are actually going to be passed through this asterisk args or this unpack operator inside of arguments. So both of these are going to be applied to this. Running Shift Enter, we get role data analyst, skill required, Python. Looks like I also formatted it wrong. I didn't put in the colon. Oh my goodness. Okay, that's better. Anyway, this allows us not only to put 2, but multiple, any number of different variables inside of here, and then still format inside the string. So that is the format method. And I'll be honest, that's not necessarily my favorite. I still find this pretty hard to read. Like if I was going through it, role, I'd have to look back and forth to understand what's going on here. And I have to also make sure that I actually align these properly. Now I could modify this further and actually add variable names inside of here, such as I use role and skill, which are the same as these variable names. They're actually different. Anyway, but we get really confusing now because we have now these 2 things in here, role and skill. We could use keyword arguments instead of role equal to role, skill equal to skill. Whenever I run this, I still get the same results. And this would maybe potentially be used in a case where I have like 5 or 10 different values here and I want to actually specify it. Anyway, I just want to make you aware of this. I'm actually not a fan of this. I'm more a fan of F strings. They're not only fun to use, they're also pretty fun to say. So here I have my variables defined, and with F strings, it goes with the names, you put an F at the beginning of your string itself. So in this case, I'm going to have an F and then either single or double quotes. And then I'm going to write the similar statement that we're trying to do, roll. And then I'm going to put a curly bracket and specify the variable that I want to actually appear inside of here. Similarly, I'll do the same thing with skill required. And I'm going to specify it inside of these curly brackets and specify skill. So now this F string very much works like that format method that we went over, where we're going to specify these variables inside the curly brackets. Pressing Shift Enter, boom, I have it. Roll.analyst, skill required, Python. Personally, to me, I'm more of a fan of this, right? Because it's so much more readable. I can just read over this. I can just read over this. Roll is, okay, I expect this roll to be next, and then skills required, expect the skill to be next. Whereas the formatting one, it's, yeah, we can actually specify variables, but then we have to do it all and configure this at the end. It's a lot more work with that. F strings, I feel, are your best bet. Now, another one I think that you should be aware of is this printf style string formatting. This came with this came in a previous version of Python, and it was carried on into Python 3. I'm not a fan of using this, but it does come up from time to time. So I think you should be aware of it in case you see it, but I don't think you should necessarily learn how to use it. Anyway, similar as far, I can use singular or double quotes. So in this case, I'll specify roll, and I'm going to use that % symbol and then S. And then we'll continue. We'll write both these in a second, but I want to just show this for the time being. From then you put a % symbol again, and then after that you put roll in parentheses. So running Shift Enter, we have roll.analyst. Now, if I want to add both variables, I can do as you expect. I'll put skill required right here, and then put that % symbol and S, and then inside of the parentheses, put skill. And now in this case, it's going to output both roll and then skills required. Find this really weird to read. I'm not a fan of it. I don't recommend using it, but you should know about it. And the last method we're going to be going over is join, and diving back into the documentation. First, for the method, you have join, inside parentheses, you have self, and then you have the iterable. So it has to be an iterable, which we're going to go over that in a second. Anyway, in it, that's going to concatenate any number of strings. The strings whose method is called is inserted in between each given string. The result is returned as a new string. So in this case, they give the example of there's a period here, and we're joining it with this list, which we haven't gone over a list yet, but this list, which we can see that there's multiple strings inside this list. And what it does is it adds a period between this. So I find more use out of this method whenever I have something like a string, which is an iterable, and I want to actually divide it up. So say I had something like years of experience, and I want to separate it by all these values by a comma. I could have actually typed it out, 0, comma, space, 1, comma, space, whatnot. That's a lot of repetition. Python is good at automating things. So what I can do is specify how I want to actually separate all those numbers. So in this case, I'm going to use a comma and then a space. And then from there, put in join. And we need to list that iterable. Like I said, years experience, which is a string, is an iterable. We can actually cycle through it. I'm having some spelling issues. And we can run this, Shift Enter. And now we can see 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now we haven't covered list yet, but I think you can understand the basic concept, right? You have items inside of here. You have a whole list. So let's say I have this list of skills. If I wanted all these lists of skills right now, they're inside this list. They're not a string. So if I see type skills and actually run this, we'll see that it's a list. Anyway, let's say I want to get into a string. In this string, I want it to have a, similar to before, I want it to have that comma and then a space after it. From there, I can just add that join method, specify skills inside of there, and then run it. And then now I have this full string that I can copy right here, and it has Python, SQL, and Excel in it. All right, so that is string formatting. If you remember anything from this video in the future, I hope that you remember, it comes no surprise, F strings. They're the most powerful, the most readable, and the most easy to use. So take advantage of them. They're very useful. All right, got a couple practice problems for those of you that purchase the course's practice problems. And with that, I'll see you in the next one. So the core of data analytics really revolves around using basic math. And if you used a calculator before, like most people, you've used different operators that we're going to be going over in this section in order to perform math. We're going to first warm up with arithmetic operators, doing things like adding and subtracting. From there, build on it further to use assignment operators, which not only assign a value, but we can do a lot of that arithmetic operation while assigning a new value. And then finally get into comparison operators, which basically review where to point Pac-Man in order to figure out what's the greater number. So jumping into a Jupyter Notebook, we've already shown before how to do basic math. Adding something like 2, which is an integer, and then 3, which is a float, we get the final answer of 5. We also saw previously that we're not limited to just integers or floats. Sometimes we can also use strings as well to do operations like an add. And we're not limited to just add with strings. We can do something like in this case of multiplying a statement or a string times a certain number. And then from there, it's going to export it out with this number multiplied times 10. Now, what happens if I wanted to use something like the minus operator? So in this case, I'm using a float of 3 and an integer of 2. I can see I'm going to get a 1. But for a string, let's say I wanted to subtract, if you will, up from up and actually run this, I'm going to get a type error. It's going to say unsupported operand types for subtract, and then string and string. Operands, in this case, are the what's up and then the up, and then the operator is that negative symbol. Anyway, how do we know what is actually supported for these different operators that are available to us? And specifically in this string case. Well, we go back to one of my favorite functions, help, and then type in str, from there shift enter. And then inside of here, I can see underneath these magic methods, which are these double underscore methods that have the double underscores before and after it. I have this add right here, so I know I can use the plus operator in this case. Also, I have the dunder method for mul or multiply. In this case, I can use the multiply operator. But if I look through these different methods and try to find the subtract method or sub, I'm not going to find it. And it is kind of intuitive of what to expect, but I think you should at least know the documentation for it. As when I run help on int, I can actually see that the subtract method is actually there, and it uses that negative sign in order to subtract them. Now recall that you can call these magic methods technically. So in this case, I defined 4 to the variable 4, and then from there ran the magic method of sub on it, and then used the value of 2. So basically 4 minus 2. In this case, we're going to get 2. But as I talked about previously, that's just to show you that the method's available. The actual Pythonic way to actually do this would be 4 minus 2, and then shift enter, get 2. Now I do want to cover some of these methods that you may not have seen or have experience with before. They do come up from time to time. So let's say I had something like 5 divided by 2. One thing to note real quick, anytime I do these operators, I'm usually going to put a space in between the number and the operator. You don't necessarily have to do that. It's still going to work just fine, but it just makes it more readable and easier to go through. Anyway, getting back to it. So we have this 5 divided by 2, and that's going to give us a value of, as we expect, 2.5. Now let's say we wanted to maintain, right now we converted it to a float, the answer's in a float. We want to go something, we want to maintain it at an integer. In this case, I could do something like floor division, which is using 2 forward slashes instead of just one single one. In this case, I'm going to get 2. Alternatively, if I wanted to get the remainder of what's left over after we divide 5 by 2, which we would expect 5 is divided by 2 times, so 1 is left over, but we could use the modulus operator, which is basically the percent symbol. So 5 modulus 2, running this, shift enter. And this would be a pretty common operation I'd see, or we would see, if we'd have to do this of 5 divided by 2 is 2 with a remainder of 1 in order to maintain in integers and not get a float. Quick reminder on order of operations. Remember it goes parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, and then addition and subtraction. So let's say we had 2 salary values. That of the minimum salary of 20,000 and the max salary of 80,000. Notice here I have these underscores in between here. This underscore is actually ignored by the interpreter when reading these values right here. And this is pretty common to use, especially whenever you're getting to thousands, millions, or billions, in order for you to be able to count how many different thousand separators there are. Anyway, we'll show it working a little bit. So let's say we wanted to get the average salary. Well, we'd have to add the minimum salary, and then from there, add it to the max salary. And then finally, divide it by 2. In this case, I expect order of operations, parentheses go first, along with the division at the end. And then I want to actually print this out to make sure that I got it. What do we expect the results to be? I had to do the math real quick. 50,000. So as expected, Python ignored that separator right there. It's not going to actually print it out with it in there anyways, but I can just take it out to also show that it's going to work as well. Still 50,000. Next up is assignment operators. And we've already gone over the equal sign before, but these are going to combine the arithmetic operations along with an assignment operator. And all the different arithmetic operations are still available. So diving in a little bit deeper to the core assignment operator of equal. Let's say we have 2 applicants. Applicant 1, Kelly, applicant 2, Luke. Let's say we want to switch those applicants. Well, I could do something like this. I could create a temporary variable and then assign it to, let's say, applicant 1. And then from there, assign applicant 1 to be equal to applicant 2. And then conversely, make it to where applicant 2, I have a spelling, no spelling error, is equal to that temporary variable. And then when I go to actually print these out, running Shift Enter, we can see now that applicant 1 and 2, it was previously Kelly Luke, it's now Luke Kelly. Well, the cool thing about Python is you can actually do assignments of multiple values on the same line. Let me show you what I mean. Let's get rid of this right here because we're not going to save that. So I'm going to rerun this line up here, assigning Kelly and Luke. Anyway, this assignment within one line allows us to use something like a comma. So applicant 1, comma, applicant 2 is equal to applicant 2, comma, applicant 1. So we can swap values on the same line. And then whenever we run this, we can see now it is Luke and then Kelly. Now this is pretty cool because you can't do this in other programming languages as well. All right, moving on to the next assignment operator. Let's say we have something like x equals to 1. And then from there, we want to add 1 to this variable of x. So I could write it to where I have x equal to, if I need to add 1 to x, I would define it again of x plus 1. And then running Shift Enter, and then printing out what actually x is, we can see that it is now 2. Well, as you expected, there's actually an easier way to do this. So instead of actually having to write x again, what I can do is use this add and assign operator. And then from there, just put the value that I want to do. This is basically the same as x equal to x plus 1 as we showed up above. And then whenever I run this and actually print out x below, we can see that it is 2. Conversely, if I wanted to multiply x times 2, I could go x and use the multiply and assign operator. And then from there, add that value of 2 in, and then from also print right underneath it, x, Shift Enter. We'll see that that is now 2. Now, all the previous arithmetic operators are available, but I'll be honest, I most frequently see the add and assign for this. So that's all we're going to cover in this. All right, last up in this section are comparison operators. And this, just like you did in 2nd grade, is verifying whether values are equal to each other, not equal, or even greater or less than. So let's say I wanted to compare 2 salary variables, which we're going to be doing a lot of that in the project section of this video. But for now, we're just going to compare these 2 variables of salary for Kelly and salary for Luke. So for this, I can check if the salary of Kelly is equal to the salary of Luke by using this double equal sign. Whenever I run this, this is going to return either true or false. And in this case, it returned false. Now, this operator is not necessarily limited to just variables. So you could technically put in something like is 1 equal to 1? And then running this, as you'd expect, you would get true. Now, a common mistake that you are probably going to make if you're new to Python is you're going to forget sometimes that whenever you're trying to do some sort of comparison, you need to put 2 equal signs. You're probably going to put 1 equal sign in. or to do this of setting an integer of 1 equal to 1, or really any integer, it's going to say syntax error, cannot assign to literal here. Maybe you meant double equal signs. So pretty nice that they actually give you this little hint here. Now, as far as the importance of these things like comparison operators, because remember, right, we said they return either a true or false value. You're probably like, Luke, why the heck do I even care about this? Well, they're going to be used inside of other things. Like we're going to be going over if statements in the future. Don't need to worry about how to actually write this code. Just want to show it as an example. But in this case, it's evaluating if salary Kelly is greater than salary Luke. Print this statement. Gotta love Python because it's so easy to read. All right, so Shift Enter, as you expected, it's going to print Kelly is paid more than Luke. So these comparison operators are going to be used inside of other different functions, loops or lists or whatnot in order to conduct operations more efficiently. And coincidentally, we're going to be covering more on conditional statements or these if statements here in the next lesson. All right, for those that purchased the course problems, you have some course problems to actually work through right now and get more familiar with these different operators. With that, see you in the next one. So as we hinted to in the last section on conditional operators, we're going to be using those type of operators inside of conditional statements. These statements do quite simple things of evaluating whether a condition is true or false and then executing it based on that. So jumping into my Jupyter Notebook, there's 3 main keywords that we're going to be covering this of if, elif, and else. And we're going to be focusing on if first, just to break down the simplicity of it. So we start a conditional statement by defining a keyword, and they always have to start with the if keyword. Then for the condition, we're going to just keep it simple for the time being, and we're going to actually just assign it of true. We'll use those comparison operators in this place in a second, but we're just going to keep it simple. Anyway, you have if the keyword, the conditional value, and then from there, you have the colon. Now for the action we want to complete, I pressed enter after going through the colon, and it automatically, if I highlight this, I can see it put 2 spaces in there. So it indented it. Anyway, now I can put in the condition or the action I want it to actually take. So in this case, if true, which is going to be true because I defined it as true, it's going to print what's up data nerds. Running Shift Enter prints what up data nerds. Conversely, if I change this to false, I expect nothing to happen because it's now false. Quick formatting note, this indentation is actually very important for whenever we go through and execute our Python code. The compiler behind the scene reads this indentation and actually uses it. So if I were to take that away and just have it underneath this statement and press play, I'm going to get an indentation error. Conversely, whenever I actually press enter, it went through and automatically put in 2 spaces in here. So sometimes you'll see 2, other times I'll just press tab, which is also going to give 2 inside of here. Sometimes you'll see people put in 4 spaces. And if I run it here with 4 spaces, this is still going to work. And actually, I can put in a number of spaces into it, and it's still going to work. The important thing is that it's indented. We're just going to maintain for consistency just those 2 spaces. So let's move into a more practical example of how I'd see this conditional statement operated in the real world. Let's say I'm trying to filter out applicants for a job based on a skill. Specifically, I'm looking for applicants with the job skill of SQL, and we have this one applicant and their skill is SQL. So let's get defining that. We'll start with the keyword of if, and then from there we're going to be comparing the job skill if it's equal to that applicant skill. And then from there, I'm going to press enter. And so if those 2 skills are equal to each other, I want to print out that skills match. So I'm going to go ahead and run this, press Shift Enter. And as you saw, I made a common error right here, right? So if job skills basically says syntax error, points the caret up at job skills, invalid syntax. Maybe you mean the actual comparison operator, not actually the equal sign. Anyway, actually putting in another equal sign into there and running this, we can see that skills match. But now let's move on into that elif keyword. Let's say we have a condition now where we're checking those skills of SQL. Let's say they don't match this, but say they have a lot of years of experience, and so they would still be something that we want to match and flag and basically cue that we want to look at this person. Well, in that case, we can use an elif statement. So I'm actually going to just take this right here and paste it right below it. So elif is going to begin on the line right below it. It's not going to be indented, so it's going to be in line with that if keyword. And we'll say if the year's experience, which we haven't defined yet, we'll define in a little bit, is greater than or equal to 5, then we do want to actually match this candidate. So we'll say print enough experience, no SQL. And I'm going to go ahead and just define that year's experience right above. We'll do an example value to make sure it matches first of equal to 6. I'm also going to move these other variables down underneath here so we can modify them and use them easier. Correcting that print statement. So we want to make sure that this is, well, first let's actually just run this as it is. We can see we're going to match on the SQL skill because SQL is equal. So let's just change this applicant skill. Let's say they have a more superior skill of Python, just kidding, and then actually run it. So we're going to fail basically, or have false for the first condition of if, because Python does not match SQL. Then for the elif, because year's experience is greater than or equal to 5, which is 6 in this case, it's going to print enough experience, no SQL. So what happens if we change this to something like 3, run it, nothing's going to print. Now, I don't really like how this doesn't print something out or capture some sort of value whenever it doesn't meet the skills or experience. So in that case, that's a great fallback for our last keyword to cover, and that is else. And basically, else is going to execute if both the if and elif statement are not executed. So in this case, I'm going to, once again, go down and start the new keyword of else. And then from there, all I have to do is put a colon in. There's no condition for this. It's just going to satisfy if both if and elif are false. And then from there, actually print out no skill or experience. So whenever I go ahead and run this based on these conditions, I have that final statement of no skill or experience. Now, one thing I did gloss over with elif, you can have multiple elif keywords within here. So let's say in the case of that job skill, since I'm really privy towards Python, let's say that we have a Python skill for an applicant. In this case, we could print out something like, this applicant should know SQL. Basically, if you know Python, you probably should know SQL. Anyway, going ahead and actually running this, Shift Enter. I can see we get no skill or experience, and that's because I wrote this wrong. I wrote this with the job skill, and I'm trying to look at the applicant skill, right? So that's why we always actually try to troubleshoot. So running this again with applicant skill in there, pressing Shift Enter. This applicant should know SQL. Now, the last thing to know on this is sometimes you may read some others functions and you may see this keyword of pass. This is typically put into place whenever you don't have, when maybe you don't know a value you want to put there for the time being, but you need something to be within or underneath that keyword of if or elif. So in this case, when I run this, nothing gets executed here. But let me show you more what this means. So let's say we actually defined if job skill is equal to applicant skill, and I'm not sure what we need to put in just yet. If I want to run this and do this, it's going to say syntax error, incomplete input. What I can do instead is actually press enter, and then for the time being, just to run it and get it through, run pass. And from time to time, you may see hardcore coders put in things like 3 dots, which are called ellipses. And in this case, it's going to be doing the same thing as that pass keyword. But I actually like to write out my keywords and make it more readable. So we're just going to put pass in. All right, that's enough of me rambling on conditional statements. Now your turn to give it a try and test out different scenarios with these conditional statements. All right, and that, see you in the next one. So I just recorded this entire video on list and realized I wasn't recording. So now we're recording it again. Anyway, so this one and the next 3 are on the 4 different type of data type containers that I find that I use from time and time again. And that are list, dictionaries, sets, and tuples. We're going to be starting with list because not only is it the most commonly used, but also it's one of the easiest to get up and running quickly. Lists are denoted by their square brackets and contain any data type within it. And in this section, we're going to be going over common methods associated with lists for altering them, adding to them, and changing them. We're even going to dive into things like unpacking lists so we can access individual items of it. And why are lists important? Well, we use them not only in the real world, but we're also going to be using them inside our data set on job posting, where each of these rows are a job posting. And if we scroll on over to the right for each of these postings, they have a set of skills that is required for it. Here I'm selected on the second line where I have skills like Python, R, SQL, Cognos, Alteryx, Tableau, and SPSS. Each one of those skills are a string inside of a list. And this data set has hundreds of thousands of different skills required for jobs. And Python is great at going through and analyzing, basically combining all these lists so we can analyze it. So here we are inside my Jupyter Notebook. I have this table here. Don't worry about too much, especially since we have lists, dictionary, and sets and tuples. I want to be able to show as we go through this how they actually relate. But the first thing we're going to look at a list is its usage. It's for a collection of ordered items, and we're denoting it with that square brackets. And if I wanted to define a list with those square brackets, I can put anything in it from an integer to a string like Python, and then I can even put another list inside of there, denoting things like SQL and the number 2. So any number of items can be in that list. You're pretty much limited by your computer resources. Pressing Shift-Enter, we can see it inside of there. But actually, let's talk about a practical example, talking about a list, maybe a list of skills, some sort of list that maybe you have of skills you have. In this, I have SQL, Tableau, and Excel. All these items are strings inside this list. So what can we do with this? Let's say I wanted to maybe add or even remove from this list certain items or certain skills. Well, how would I find that out? Well, using my favorite function, help, and then putting within it list. Shift-Enter. Here's the help on class list. It's its own class, so list is an object. We can do things as we saw before of add, which we're going to get to, of adding values. But we care about adding and then removing from it. So actually, I want to look at maybe other methods, including things like append, where we would append an object to the end of the list. And for this, all we have to define is an object to append to it. Additionally, we have methods like remove, which remove the first occurrence of a value. So if our job skills list, let's say I wanted to append a new item to it. So you can probably guess what skill I'm going to add to this. It's going to be Python. Press Shift-Enter. We added it to it, and then actually checking out that list, pressing Shift-Enter, we see we have SQL, Tableau, Excel, and then Python as it added it to the end. Now, if I wanted to remove an item from the list, I could do job skills.remove, and then from there, it has value. And it says remove the first occurrence of a value. So in this case, it's expecting a string for what we need to put in here. So we'll go ahead and remove Tableau, pressing Shift-Enter, and then actually showing this list right underneath it. We can see we have now SQL, Excel, and Python. Tableau is now removed. Now, another method I find myself using all the time is the length message, and that's denoted by len and then open brackets. And then inside of that, you can put any type of object. So I could put, before I put Python in there and ran it, and we can see that Python's 6 characters long. Anyway, I can do this also for a list. So I can put in job skills, running it, Shift-Enter. We see we get 3. 3 items are in there. So speaking of 3, let's go over the indexes of a list. So for this list here, we have 3 items. They are indexed as 0, 1, and 2. In programming, we don't start at the number 1. Instead, we start at the number 0. Why? Because we're better than everyone else. But there's an important reason why we're actually doing this as well. Let's actually put this to use on these indexing. So for this list of skills, let's say I wanted maybe the second item in this list. So I could say job skills, and then from there, I'm going to use square brackets. And inside of those square brackets, I'm going to then provide the index number of it. Remember, it goes 0, 1, 2. I want the second item, so it's going to be, no, not 2, it's going to be 1. So putting that in, running Shift-Enter, we can see the second item is Excel. Now you're probably like, Luke, why does this even matter? Understand the index. Well, because we know the index, we can more precisely control where we place something in this list. Remember, Python lists are ordered in nature. So we can use this insert method to insert an object before an index. So as expected for the arguments, it takes index and also the object we want to insert into the list. Conversely, we can use this pop method, which removes and returns items at an index and it defaults to the last value. So for these job skills, let's say we wanted to put Tableau back in, but we wanted to put it back in where it was previously in between Excel and Python. So I start by defining the list, use insert, and then when the helper box comes up, we have to provide the index first. Remember, it's the last index, what you want to put before. So in this case, 0, 1, 2, we want to put it before 2, and we want to put in Tableau. Running Shift Enter, it now inserted into the list, but we want to see it. So I'm going to go ahead and print it. And we see we have SQL, Excel, Tableau, and Python. And now let's say we want to remove Python from it. We can use that pop method. So I can define job skills and, oh my goodness, I'm not typing right. Job skills and then the pop method. And remember, this takes the index, but the default is last. So I could put 2 in this case and then put Shift Enter. Oh, dang it. All right, well, it doesn't matter. So it popped 2 in this case. So we pop Tableau. What do we have? Job skills, Shift Enter. Okay, we got SQL, Excel, Python. And just to show a point, if I wanted to remove Python from that list, I could just use pop. And then from there, whenever I run this, it's going to pop out Python. I'm looking at the list, job skills. We can see we have only SQL and Excel now, even less skills. Now, these index values don't only have the ability to access them one by one. Maybe we want to access multiple values of them. And accessing multiple values is done by slicing. Now, slicing has a very common syntax to how we access the index, except now we're going to be inserting this colon here. We have multiple values of a start, end, and stop. So let's just start with that start and end first. So if I have job skills and I want to get all items in the list, I could say, hey, start at 0 and then go until the end of this. And as we know, we go to 2 for this, running Shift Enter. We can see from this, we only have SQL and Excel. And for this, one thing to remember, right? Starting index is inclusive and the ending index is exclusive. So it's not included in this. So in this case, actually, if we want to include all items of the list, we're going to put 3, running Shift Enter. We got SQL, Excel, and Python. Now, both of those values actually are the default values of start and stop. So technically, if I were to write this and have it include all the values of a list, I'd want to more appropriately have it as this with only the colon in there. It's going to have all the items of the list. Now, similarly, say I wanted only the first item in the list, I could do this 0:1, run Shift Enter. Like I said, any of those default values, you're typically not going to see it. So you're just going to leave it blank in this case. And in this case, we're going to get SQL. Now, the last item to cover in this is step, and that's the steps to take between items. It defaults to 1. So if I were to run this of job skills, leaving those default values of a colon, include another colon, and then adding the 1. Whenever I run this, Shift Enter, we get all the items of the list. Now, whenever I change this last value to 2 to do every other one or every second one when I run this, I'm only going to get SQL and Python. So it does every second one. Conversely, if I change this to a 3, run Shift Enter, we're only going to get the first item because there's not enough items to actually do that. But let's actually do this on a bigger list to actually show the effects of this. So we have these 2 lists here. This is Luke's skills and then also Kelly's skills. And there are 2 separate lists. Now I can define a new list if I want and call this all skills. And I'm going to set it equal to my skills and then also plus Kelly's skills. Then whenever I print this out, we should have all those skills added together. Shift Enter, Python BigQuery, R, Python SQL Looker. Now, one thing to notice about is this. This list has repeating values in it, and that's okay, and that's going to be allowed with lists. Also, it maintained the order at which we added those 2 lists together. Anyway, getting back to our example, if we wanted to see every second item in that list, we could call out all skills, and then from there, colon, colon, and then we'll put in 2, shift enter. We can see every second item, which is Python, R, and then SQL. Now, what happens if we want the last item in this list? So as we recall, we have all skills. And if I wanted to do this, I would have to count over. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in this case. So I would put in here 5 and then a colon, and I would just leave that blank. Running shift enter, we can see we get looker. But that was actually a lot of work to access the last item in a list. Well, conveniently, the indexes of these lists are actually in reverse, but for their negative values. So we don't necessarily start at 0 because 0 is denoted for the first item in the list. So we start at -1. And in this, we have Excel is -1 because that's the first last item. And conversely, SQL is the second last item. So an actually easier way, if I wanted to get the last item in this list, is I would just go in and put -1 colon, shift enter, and then I'd get looker. Conversely, if I wanted to get the last 2 items, I'll just put -2 in there and I get the last 2 items. The last concept to cover is unpacking. And this involves assigning each of the variables of an iterable, such as a list, to a variable in one single line. And we can go further and even access it. So back with our core list of job skills with Python, Excel, and SQL, if I wanted to assign each one of those values to its own variable, let's say skill 1, skill 2, and then skill 3, I can then assign it to that list. And then I'm going to print out each one of those variables just to show what's inside of it. Calling print statement on each one of those, running shift enter, we can see we have Python, Excel, and SQL inside each one of those individual variables. And we did this all in one line. This is called unpacking. Now let's say I only cared about that first item in that list, and I didn't really care about whatever second, or maybe there's going to be even like a fourth variable inside of here, such as looker. So I'll run in this case so we have even more variables. So I'll define that variable of skill, maybe that I'm concerned with, so skill concerned. But then for the other ones, I want to assign it to maybe a value of skill don't care. This isn't necessarily appropriate syntax. Anyway, skill don't care. I want to assign all these values to this, and I want to assign it to or equal to that job skills. But remember, right, we have, if I were to run this right now, I'm going to get a value error. There's too many values to unpack. Basically, there's 4 items in this list. I'm only defining 2 here. Anyway, what I can do now is actually use an unpack operator, which just an asterisk. It's also called a star operator. And what's going to happen here is this unpacks an iterable into here. So in this case, skill concerned about will put the first item into here, and then all the rest of those skills, because we have this unpack operator in front of it, is going to go into there. So printing this out, I have skill concerned and skill don't care. Great name, I know. Running shift enter, we have Python in that first one, and then all those other values in a list inside this other one. Now the unpack operator is an advanced concept, but it does come up from time to time, especially when you need to dive in and understand functions, which we're going to get to more in an upcoming section. So you need to be aware of it, but you don't need to be a master of it. So going back up to our fancy dancy table that I made, we've gone over list already, right? So we understand it's a collection of ordered items. We understand that it's for a sequence, it's ordered, they use indexes, and that duplicate values are allowed. And then this last one here says mutability, it's mutable. What does that mean? Well, using ChatGPT to define this, in Python, objects are either mutable or immutable based on whether they can be altered after creation. So mutable objects can be changed after creation. Examples include lists, dictionaries, sets. Things that can't be are things like strings, integers, and tuples. We proved that lists are mutable whenever we appended Python onto our list, and also when we removed Tableau from our list, because we made a change to the list. Therefore, it is mutable. It's a common word that comes up from time to time for Python programmers, so you need to be aware of it. And now you'll be wondering, when would you need an immutable object? Well, we'll get to that in an upcoming section. All right, for those that purchase the course Problems, you have some problems to get to. Start diving in deeper to understand how to alter lists and fun problems. All right, with that, I'll see you in the next one. Now time to get into a more advanced container data type, moving on from list now into dictionaries. Now, this data type is very similar to the physical form of a dictionary. I don't actually have a book or a dictionary, but I do have this app here on my phone that I use from time to time to actually look up values. And in dictionaries, the definition is stored based on the term itself. So in this case, Python is what's stored underneath the definition. And dictionaries in Python, very similar. In this case, the dictionary is what's in between the curly brackets. Looking at just this first line of databases in Postgres, the databases is the key, and then the colon then denotes that everything following this is the values associated with that key. From there, we use a comma to separate to the next key value pair. In this, we're going to be going over popular methods, including this one of identifying the keys of a dictionary. And you're probably going to see some that are very familiar that resemble ones that we learned with lists. And so why is this important? Well, if we go back to those data science job posting data set that we're going to be using, we not only had for each posting a list of skills, but we also have a dictionary, which has the type of skill for a key, and then the value of it is a list of the associated skills for that type. So in this first example, we have types of skills of analyst tools, databases, and programming. So let's create our first dictionary. We're going to do it by starting it with a curly brackets. And then first we need to define what is the key. In this case, we're going to be storing a list of skills. We're going to start with databases first. So we'll put in there database. This is the key. From there, we put in a colon to denote now we want to put in the values. In this case, I'm going to put my favorite database based on the SQL course that I just made. And I'm putting this also in a string. Both of these are strings. We'll talk about data types in a second. Anyway, running this, pressing Control Enter. I have database and Postgres. This key value can be almost any data type. It has to be hashable, meaning it has to have a unique value. So you could do something like 4 in here, but you couldn't do something like a list. So I couldn't do a list of database as the key. It's going to tell me that it's unhashable. Anyway, just cleaning this up. Now, unlike keys, the values can be any number of data types. So I could have, in this case, a list here for the value. Running it, we can see that it is. I can even have other things in here too, like an integer, another string, and we haven't even got to it yet, but a tuple. Running this all, Shift Enter. Oops, I didn't put this in a list. Because I'm having multiple different data types in there, it has to store it in something, so I'll put it in a list. Anyway, running this, Shift Enter, we can see all those different values because it's still a list are inside of there. So for now, we're just going to stick with strings. So we've defined one key and value. We can then, if we want to define another one, we're going to put a comma. And then we'll define what we want to put in. I want to do one for language, and we're going to do, as you guessed it, probably my favorite one, Python. Running it here, I'm going to get Shift Enter, and we have all of the values here. Now let's assign it a value and set it equal to this. Additionally, we're going to add one more data type to this, and that's of library. And we'll be adding one that we'll be covering here soon of pandas. And I'm getting this red syntax highlighting because I didn't put the correct colon here instead of a comma. Anyway, if you notice, this is sort of hard to read and go through very quickly and seeing what are the key value. So because this is enclosed within curly brackets, we can actually break this up into multiple lines. And in this case, it'd be common to start a new line right here, tab it over. Same here, we're going to start a new line on languages, start a new line on libraries, and then move this over. Now I'm getting some syntax highlighting because it looks like I actually deleted my curly brackets. And now we got to run it to actually see it. So pressing Shift Enter, we can see that we have this. It's all on one line when it shows it to you here. But anyway, with this here, we can actually see this better and actually investigate a dictionary. So we're going to be defining dictionaries in this very similar format from here on out, but it's not necessary. You could write it on one line. You can just remove the indentation if you want. You can do the indentation all over the place. No matter what, it's going to compile because you have it within those curly brackets. So what can we do with these dictionaries? Well, like anything, we're going to actually use a function of help to actually investigate that dict data type. So running this, Shift Enter. This is the help on class dict and the modules built in. And the first one we're going to look at is probably the most common method used with this, and it's actually a magic method with a double underscore, and it's get item. And if we can see down here, yes, they have it written as X for the dictionary name and then Y for the key, but it can be very similar to how we indexed lists. We can do similar like an index method on dictionaries. So what does that actually mean? Well, let's actually show it in some code. So if I type out job type skills, and then from there put a square bracket right after it, and then inside of there put something like database, and running Shift Enter, we're going to call the key of database and get the value of Postgres. Additionally, they have the get method right here that returns the value for a key if key is in the dictionary, else it defaults to none. But I'll be honest, I don't use that method that much. However, ones I do use are this keys method, and it provides a set-like object providing a view on D's keys, which D is the dictionary. We haven't covered sets yet, but you're going to probably know enough already with list to understand what's going to come out of this. And also the values method, and it basically provides an object providing a view of D's values or dictionary's values. So starting out with job type skills and then adding the keys method, using that opening, closing parentheses, running this, I get the keys of this. Conversely, whenever we use the values method, we're going to get the values from that dictionary, Postgres, Python, Pandas. If we wanted to remove something from this dictionary, similar to what we did with lists, we can use that pop method. And so we do pop, opening parentheses. We can see that for this, you provide a key in order to pop up at a value. So let's pop out that library value. Running Shift Enter. We can see we get pandas out of there. And then whenever we run job type skills, we only have now the databases key and the language key. Now we can remove items for dictionary, but what if we want to add it? Well, this is where the update method comes into play. So to find the dictionary, use the update method. And then inside of here, I'm going to provide it with a dictionary. So let's say I wanted to add cloud technologies to this. So I'll start it by defining cloud. And then after that, I'll add in what cloud provider I'm going to go with. I'm I prefer Google Cloud. So in this case, running this Shift Enter. So we'll notice I got a value error. Dictionary update sequence element has length 17 too. Anyway, what's going on here is we forgot something, right? The colon. So putting in a colon here, right? We got to use a colon to separate this along with having it in there, running Shift Enter. Boom. All right. Actually checking this to make sure it is there. We have database, language, and now cloud. There's actually an easier method that I would actually recommend for updating values. So if you recall, whenever I did that job type skills and then set the square brackets of, let's say we wanted to look what cloud was now, running Shift Enter, we can see that it's Google Cloud. We can use this same notation in order to define a new key and then also value. So let's say I wanted to add the skills of version control. I would define it here, and then let's say I just ran it right now because we don't have a version control in there. Basically it says, hey, version control, a key error, it's not there. Anyway, we're gonna create it. We're creating it now. We'll set it equal to a value, and we'll say inside of it, we're gonna keep get there. So running this again, Shift Enter, bam, should be in there. Let's actually check. Job type skills, Shift Enter. Boom, now I have multiple database, language, cloud, and version control in it. So going back up to that fancy dancy table, we've covered a lot about these dictionaries. They're for key and then value pairs, and they're a mapping data type. Unlike lists, which are maintained in order, dictionaries are not maintained in order, so don't try to keep any order in it. Now, dictionaries do allow duplicate values within it. Now, you can't have, because of the index or the key itself, you can't duplicate that, but you can duplicate the values inside of whatever following it. It could be in multiple different keys. And we did show the last point of it being mutable. By the fact that we were able to pop out items and also update items to this dictionary, it's mutable. It's able to be changed. All right, now it's your turn to dive in and test out those practice problems. Also, feel free to test out what I said about that values can be duplicated, but keys cannot. in order to very much clarify what the definition is and what the characteristics of a dictionary are. All right, with that, see you in the next one. Now that we covered lists and dictionaries, it's mostly downhill from here for the rest of these container data types. We're going to be moving now into sets. Sets are very similar to lists, with the exception of, instead of using square brackets, you're using those curly brackets. There's no colon, so it doesn't become a dictionary. As we're going to show, sets are mutable, so you can add and remove items from sets. However, sets are unique in the fact that if we were to convert this list into a set, it's going to remove items that are duplicated, like Python in this case. Inside my Jupyter Notebook, let's compare sets to those other data types. Sets are mainly designed for unique items, and so they don't allow unique values. However, they're unordered and there's no indexing available with it. So let's get into defining our first set. We're going to do similar to our list of skills that we did before. We're going to define a variable of job skills and then define our set. So I'm going to start by defining it by creating these curly brackets. From there, I'm going to put a list of skills in there. Now I'm putting only a list of strings in here. Once again, you can put any data type inside of a set, and running Shift Enter, we can see that when we print out job skills now, we have all those values. But notice something about it. Whenever I defined a list before, all those different items stayed in that order. Now, whenever I go and call that set of job skills, they're not in the same order that it was previously. It is doing it in alphabetical order, but don't always count on that. So don't think that you can use sets in order to alphabetize things. Now for lists, whenever I wanted to find an item in a certain position, I could just define this with a square bracket and then put in an item. In this case, we have 4, so 1 I'll do in this case. But for us, it's not going to work because set object is not subscriptable. It's fancy talk for saying there's no index. You can't do this. Now going to my favorite function, help, let's actually look at some common methods that I use on sets. Here we are on the help on class set in modules built in. For it, we have things like add, where it adds an element to a set. And like lists also, we have that pop method where we remove and return an arbitrary set element. So a lot of the same characteristics we were able to do with lists, we're going to be able to do with these sets as well. So if I wanted to do something like add a new skill, such as looker, I can go ahead and Shift Enter and then printing that out, job skills. Running Shift Enter, we can see now we have looker in there. Now let's test that feature of having only unique values. Let's add something to this that's already in this set. Specifically, we'll add something simple like SQL. Running this, pressing Shift Enter, it runs, but then whenever we actually look inside of here, we're going to see that SQL is still only listed once. Now let's actually remove an element from this list. Let's use that pop method that we used before. Remember, whenever we did it, we did job skills, then open parentheses. Let's say I want to remove something like Tableau. If I run this, oh, I don't have the correct format here. I got to put pop. Okay, running this, Shift Enter, I'm actually gonna get a type error. Set.pop takes no arguments. So unlike lists where we could provide it an index value to remove something in it, we can't do the same thing here with sets because, well, they're unordered, so we don't have an index. So if I actually ran this job skills pop method, it's going to provide an arbitrary value from this and remove it. In this case, it picks statistics. It's just random. And then if I were to run these job skills, pressing Shift Enter, we can see that now we have Looker, Python, SQL, Tableau, no longer statistics in it. So if I wanted to remove a specific value from this, I'd actually have to use the remove method and then specify something like Tableau in this case, pressing Shift Enter, and then it did it. Now inspecting that set, we see we have Looker, Python, SQL. You're probably like, Luke, what the heck are we using these sets for then? Well, the primary use case that I find for it is being able to extract out unique values, whether it's in something like a list or tuple, and being able to do that very efficiently. So let's say I have this list of skills, and inside of it, you can see that I have multiple values repeated inside of here. What I can do now is that I can actually convert that skill list to a set. So running Shift Enter, we can see that it removes the values from it. And then if I wanted to actually convert it back